Hey everybody, welcome back to Diggish America Presents. I'm your host, Ben Harrell, and we're continuing our journey through Season 6, where we're focusing on leadership in the fumigation industry. In our last episode, we talked about the importance of leading with safety first, how creating a culture of accountability can help reduce incidents and protect teams. If you missed that one, be sure to go back and check it out. Today, we're tackling another topic that's essential for leaders in our industry: time management. We all know fumigation is a game of timing, with exposure durations, aeration windows, and regulatory deadlines. But what we don't always talk about is how important it is to manage our own time as leaders. Between overseeing the field, handling administrative work, meeting with clients, mentoring your team, and staying compliant, time can feel like your most limited resource. So, how do you make it all work without burning out? That's what we're going to explore in this episode: how to master time management in the fumigation industry. We'll look at strategies to prioritize, delegate, and stay focused in a fast-paced, high-stakes environment. And to help us dig into this topic, I've invited Scott Robbins, Business Development Manager at Douglas Products, to share his experience and insights. So, please help me welcome Scott to the podcast. Scott, how are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing well, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks again for agreeing to be on the podcast. You are a first-time podcast guest, so this is pretty exciting. You know, I've known you for several years now. You've been a huge help to me in my career when I've needed difficult questions answered, so I couldn't think anybody better to talk to you about this particular topic today.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, Ben, so thanks for having me on.
So as a first-time podcast guest, I wanted to start out just by kind of giving you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, so for the group, Scott Robbins, I'm with Douglas Products. I'm the Business Development Manager for the Northeastern U.S. and Canada. Sounds like a large territory, but there's only the Profume product in Canada and only a handful of fumigators. So really not everybody gets amazed when they hear that I have an entire country as a territory the size of Canada, but not that much to do up there. Before that, I spent over 18 years as a technical services manager for a Midwestern regional pest control company, and that's where you and I met.
Yeah, it was great to be able to work with you back in the day, and it's been pretty terrific being able to work with you in your current role as well. So again, you're one of those people that I call when I have questions, in particular these days about sulfuryl fluoride. So, you know, that's always much appreciated. But today's topic, actually, we're not going to be talking about fumigants in particular. We're going to be talking about time management with regards to fumigation. And this is a topic that I don't think we really talk about too much, you know, how to manage your time when we're working with these particular fumigants and insecticides. So I'm pretty interested to hear what your thoughts are on this. So, I mean, right out of the gate, I'm just going to start kind of by asking you this question. Our industry really is driven by time-sensitive treatments. And what I mean by that is a lot of times when the post-harvest and commodity fumigations take place, it's on holidays, it's on weekends, and it involves plant shutdowns. And so time management is absolutely crucial because every hour that a facility is shut down is an hour of lost production, which is an hour of productivity, which is an hour's worth of money, so to speak. So what does time management in that kind of a context mean for a fumigation leader?
Well, the answer I had, Ben, was exactly, kind of what you said in the primer. You know, time is money. It's cliche, I know, but it really is in our business, especially for those really large jobs. If you spend a lot of time in preparation, that's going to help you plan and conserve labor. Next to cost of materials, I mean, that's a very large cost that you're factoring into the business side of your fumigation, that labor component. So planning, maybe it's finding ways to seal the building better, a more efficient sealing process. And that gets the building under gas faster, because it's a concentration over time component, as all the fumigators listening know. And that could mean an effective treatment or even possibly even a more effective treatment. So it's an important factor. And as you were said too, it's important to the customer. They're remedying that pest related quality issue and they need to get their production running up again, or they need to get that commodity turned and shipped. And then lastly, we got to think about our people. Time's important to the crew. That's generally not the time we're thinking of, like labor. They're thinking more, let's get the job done. And then some of them that aren't staying for the entire weekend, maybe they get to go home and spend some of that holiday weekend with the real reasons they come to work in the first place. So everybody really wants the job done on time.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right with all of that. And I would even say also that your fumigant selection sometimes is based on time management as well. And what I mean by that is different fumigants allow for different exposure periods. So you may have one fumigant that may take 72 hours minimum exposure period in order to be successful. And then you have other fumigants like sulfurofluoride where you can do a much shorter fumigation if you increase the concentration. So you have that ability to kind of manage your time based on which fumigant that you select. Now, cost is involved with that. The shorter time period, the more gas you need. So the more gas you need, the more money you're going to spend in order to get the job done. But if time is a huge issue for that particular customer, sometimes you can shorten that exposure period and save them some of that time, which may end up saving them some money. In some cases, the loss in production costs more than the additional gas. And in those cases, you can shorten that time period and get them back up and running faster.
Absolutely. The one caveat to that, though, is when you get all of that extra gas in the building to hit that target CT, you got to make sure you've got a good plan to get that gas back out of the building
Yeah.
during your aeration step. So that could extend that aeration time. So there's checks and balances, as all the experienced fumigators know with sulfurofluoride and other fumigants, that getting that gas back out of the building so you can turn it back over to the client. And then there are certain situations where, yes, we can ramp up the dosage and we can shorten the exposure period, but there are maybe certain situations where that might, whether it would be the structure or the commodity with an extremely high load factor, or it may even be a structure where you're adding a lot of gas initially, and adding a lot of gases especially with sulfurofluoride and a lot of your cylinderized, you're adding a lot of extra vapor pressure, which maybe the structure is not set up for all of that dosage. It's not the best way to handle that particular job to give your customer the desired results they want.
Yeah, you're absolutely right with what you just said, Scott. I'm glad you brought that up. And that's yet again another reason why communication with the facility manager or the person responsible for the facility, why that conversation with them is so important, because you need to be able to weigh those options with them. The shorter fumigation exposure period isn't always the best solution, even if it may be the fastest solution. So you're spot on with that.
Exactly. Yeah, there are even certain target pests that you may want to extend that exposure period for to have a more effective job.
Yeah, and that's exactly what time management is. Time management isn't always about saving yourself some time. It's about managing the time that you need in order to be safe and effective. And sometimes that may be an increase in exposure period and not always a decrease in exposure period. Hey, if we could all get fumigations done in less than 24 hours and be successful, I think we would. Safe and successful, I think we would, but that's not always the case. So we have to be able to manage that time and manage the customer's expectations. Absolutely.
Exactly. Being the lead fumigator, the most pressure that you see, besides keeping everyone safe, and that includes your crew and affected bystanders or your clients' employees and everyone, that it's that race against the clock. Get the building under gas, make sure you hit that target concentration, and then get that aeration completed on schedule. It takes a whole lot of planning.
Oh, yeah. So what are some of the biggest time wasters that you've seen in daily operations, from fumigation crews? I know we all try to work as efficiently as we can, but there are some situations where there may be some practices that people follow that take more time than they should if they were done in a different way, I guess. But what are some of those time wasters, and how do you think that they can be avoided?
Well, I think one thing is, on a broader concept, not just for fumigation crew, is there's the time management concept, the tyranny of the urgent. Someone ends up knocking on your door as you were getting ready to do something else with your daily operations and comes in, and always when someone needs something, it's always very important to them, but when does it really need to be done? Is it worth interfering with the plan that you had going forward? Can it be put off for a few minutes, for a few hours, maybe to another day? So making sure that you're valuing time as a commodity. Obviously, anything that has to do with safety or getting your work crew out the door, that's definitely urgent. But anyone else that knocks on your door, you want to plan your work, and then you want to work that plan, and it's important in that plan that you build some time into your day, or maybe days into your calendar, for unexpected delays or other projects that pop up.
Yeah, and you brought up a couple of really good points here. And the first one was being able to prioritize the importance of things throughout the day. You're absolutely right. People are going to bring work or issues or concerns or whatever to you as a fumigation manager to help get them solved, or maybe more tasks. And as the manager, you have to kind of be able to prioritize in what order those things get done. I mean, safety, of course, like you said, is always paramount and is of the most importance. So if it's a safety issue, it needs to be corrected immediately. But as a manager, you have to be able to look at the list of things that need to be done and prioritize them based on importance and timing and all kinds of different things. Because sometimes when people come to you with something, it's important to them, of course, and should be. But in your list of things to do, it may fall somewhere below that top spot. So you have to kind of be able to balance and communicate with them, let them know, hey, I know this is very important. I have a few other things that I have to work on right now, but I will get whatever your need is done in as timely of a fashion as I can. So you're absolutely right on that. And then again, preparation, you mentioned it. And we talk about that all the time on the podcast, planning and preparing, and how important it is to plan for the things that could go wrong and plan enough time in to be able to correct those issues if or when they show up.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We always want to say when we're interrupted or it looks like we're juggling a lot, that we're multitasking. And multitasking is a myth, and to be honest, I'm not sure that multitasking belongs in the fumigation space. Fumigation is all about covering details, and distractions could result in a missed detail. And hopefully it's just lost time that detail cost you.
Yeah.
So, losing your focus, you risk losing track of what could be a real important detail.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely correct. So, as managers, of course, and I like to say this, I think, in our industry, when you have kind of that title of manager in our industry, the expectation is, and I like to say this, is, you have to have one blue collar and you have to have one white collar, meaning you have to spend a lot of your time in the field actually, doing the work with your team. But then also you have a lot of administrative duties that you have to do too. That's the white collar part of it. So how do you personally balance those administrative duties with the need to be present in the field with the team?
Well, when a client calls me and they need something, I like to ask for a deadline or read the room in the conversation, so to speak. And is it an urgent thing that, oh man, I really need to get them an answer right now? Or is it something where, all right, the bid isn't due till the end of next week? Do I have time to get the information back to them, not drop what I was doing right now? As a lead fumigator, it's important, I think, to establish a timeline specific to the fumigation. And those timelines may vary by the type of fumigation work that you're doing, whether it's port work in containers or grain operations or full-fledged warehouse or food production jobs. So this timeline for each job, and then take that timeline and use it for allocating different duties within the plan, such as, do you need to order lifts? Do you need to order porta potties for your crew, your guards? Do you need to order, lunch? And as any good fumigator will tell you, what you order for lunch is important because
Oh, yeah.
that helps with morale. And pizza is easy, but it's heavy and it doesn't work well on a hot July day like we're
Yeah.
experiencing right now. So all these little details, and they come with a lot of experience. And, as we've mentioned, a fumigation company is dealing with generally a lot of different fumigants, and they all require different application equipment and various exposure times. And even though you're doing port work, you might be dealing with a handful of fumigant products on a daily basis, and knowing all the details and between equipment and exposure times and everything. And then it gets even more confusing for those workers because concentration exposure times might vary by a nation's dictated treatment schedule. And then that's just treatment. And then you got to go around and talk about aeration and clearance and maybe local permitting for aeration and fumigant discharge. There's all kinds of factors that go into all these various timelines, but having them written out where everyone executing knows what's going on, covering all those details, very important. Mind-boggling. Actually, it's probably the one thing that wrapping my head around since I started as a Midwest fumigator and then started learning a lot of the import export guys on the ports, and then dealing with another complete label in another country. Wrapping your head around all of these different things has been probably the biggest learning thing I've had to do since coming on board at Douglas.
Yeah, and I mean, it can get very complex. A lot of these administrative duties, especially the paperwork, can become very complex, especially when you start getting into the import-export fumigation business. But I mean, another thing too is a lot of these administrative duties, specifically the paperwork, kind of what I'm talking about, you can't really kind of put off. Like fumigation management plans and things like that, which are kind of field work, but they're kind of administrative duties too. Those are live documents. Those need to be filled out throughout the course of the fumigation in order to stay, label compliant, first of all, but then also you want to be able to track all of that, and you want to track it as you're going for proof of success on the fumigation. The paperwork is a good way to cover your butt, so to speak, and to actually prove that you've had a successful fumigation. And it also creates a template to look at later on if you are afforded the opportunity to fumigate the same place repeatedly. You can look back on previous fumigation management plans and kind of see what went right and maybe what went wrong, weather conditions that may have affected your fumigation, things like that. All of that stuff goes in a fumigation management plan. In my opinion, that's kind of an administrative duty. It's something that needs to be filled out. It's not always filled out solely by the fumigation manager. Sometimes lead fumigators or other fumigators will assist in filling it out, especially the monitoring part of it, the monitoring data collection part of it. But that administrative duty can't wait until the end. It needs to be filled out really starting prior to the fumigation, and then it needs to be filled out throughout the course of the fumigation. So things like that, you have to be present in the field with you, and you have to be able to take some time out of actual, like the physical labor part of it, and then spend some time on that paperwork part of it.
Absolutely. I think that's one thing that some fumigators, maybe they don't do on those repeat jobs you mentioned. They don't take the time to go back and take a look and see what's changed. Walk that roof again, see if there's any new equipment, walk the perimeter of the building, notice that vent that's 45 feet off the ground, that exhaust vent that wasn't there last year. And how are you going to seal that thing? Do you already have a lift on site? Do you not? Is it added to your checklist of equipment of things that you need to seal so you don't forget about it since it's new. There's a lot of details like that. Maybe you're dealing with new personnel that you're, in the QA sanitarian role or production team, whoever you're dealing with on that fumigation. And you need to recover all of these important details with the planning and timeline in your FMP as well. And then set a timeline with them in that FMP. That one of the biggest time wasters that I see is the crew gets to the job site and they get up on the roof and half the equipment's still on when it was supposed to have been turned off
Oh,
by
yeah. Yeah.
7 a.m. And everyone's just standing around with their hands in their pockets because there's not a lot to do because the customer missed their part of the timeline. Or I had a fumigation where the customer wasn't maintaining their exhaust equipment. And every year that we went back, less and less of their exhaust fans were working. And I didn't get to hand him the keys back on a job in time because we weren't done with aeration because 1 out of 4 exhaust fans in one section of the plant were working. So wasn't my fault when I showed up there to do their
Yeah.
fumigation that only 1 of 4 fans was working, but I couldn't get the building back to them on time. They weren't happy with it. I wasn't happy because I still had a 6-hour drive home.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it's really tough to plan for that stuff. But I mean, that's again, like you said, that sometimes that's where the inspection comes into play, taking the time at the beginning of the fumigation or before the fumigation is scheduled to begin and doing that inspection and then addressing it with the customer. That doesn't mean the customer is going to fix it, of course, such as in your case, they had 1 out of 4 exhaust fans working. I'm sure you told them about that before the fumigation started and they chose not to get them fixed. But I think that sometimes the timing of it is out of our control, meaning that we are at the mercy of whether it's weather or, like you said, exhaust fans not working or, the customer not being prepared. Their timing can be off. So all these things happen and we have to be able to take that into consideration. And that's why kind of padding the time, so to speak, a little bit is a good idea. If you have people on your crew that have to leave, I'm making this up, of course, but say they, you tell your crew, oh, you'll definitely be out of here by Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m. And then Saturday afternoon at 5 p.m. rolls around and you still are on the job. And now your employees are grumbling because you promised them, an escape date, so to speak, at 2 p.m. on
mhm.
Saturday. And it's carried over for 2 hours. But you have to be able to explain to your crew, hey, things like this happen. Expect the unexpected. If things aren't going well, we may end up having to stay a little bit later to get the job done. So the expectation of that time being a little malleable and maybe having to change due to circumstances beyond your control is certainly something that happens. It happens, I hate to say it, but it happens sometimes frequently.
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, Murphy's always going to show up at some
Yeah.
part during the day on a large job. The ones that go planned to the book, they seem to be rare on those really large, difficult jobs.
Yeah, you're right. But as fumigators, we always get it done. That's the
That's right.
important thing, We always get the insects killed and we always go home safe. That's the plan. So obviously, when we're working with fumigants and we're out on these jobs and there's possibly production shut down, that's a lot of weight. That's a lot of urgency that's kind of falling on the fumigator's shoulders. What strategies do you use to prioritize your duties during the fumigation when all of that urgency is kind of resting on your shoulders?
Well, one of the things that can help you deal with the urgent, I like to use technology on the job site, especially when things seem to be popping up in my way and wanting to snatch my attention. I love to grab my smartphone and I make myself a note to come back and check those exhaust fans again that weren't shut off when, because we just told the crew to work around them and we'll come back and get those later. So I want to make sure that they were done. So I put myself a reminder in my phone to go off in 2 hours. Maybe it's something that we're getting the job done without it, but wow, we forgot to pack something and it would be great if we made sure we brought that next time. Or we thought of something else, and put yourself a note in so you can add that to your packing list for the next job. I like to do a lot of notes. Lead fumigators, we always kind of take a beating from the crew, right? Because we run around and we point and we bark a lot.
Yeah.
And if we see something that wasn't sealed right, we want it redone, and we're kind of pains in the neck. But I think you mentioned something earlier that's really important, and that your crew, when they see you out in the field, I didn't start off as a lead fumigator. I don't think anybody does. So you start off as that guy that you're the worker, you're the grunt, you're down there in the dust around the bottom of the vent on the top of the flour mill and cleaning everything off, and you're cutting the poly and taping and sealing, and you're up there and it's hot and you're sweaty. And I think your crew, when they see you, they know that's where you come from, or they've seen you do that. I think they respect you a little bit more, that you're not afraid to get down in the dirt, or that they know that you've done that. And the one thing I always like to bring up to my crew at the end of the day is that step counter in that phone. It seems like, yes, they walked a lot of steps and they did a lot of work too, but it always seemed like I walked a whole lot more back and forth, checking on the different teams. And it's a big responsibility. And my time's all about the job. Just because we get the building under gas, my job as a lead fumigator is not done. I'm using that smartphone and I'm setting an alarm in the middle of the night when I think the building should be at equilibrium, and making sure that I've hit my target concentration. And then waking up again a couple of other times and making sure that my half loss time is true and accurate for how I plan the job. And I'm inputting that information into the Fuma guide for Profume, and I'm making sure that I'm hitting my target concentration by the end of the job. I don't need any add gas. So, because if I'm going to use add gas, I want to use a little bit with a longer exposure time left in my planned period, so I'm not adding as much cost. So, well, depending on how you bid the job, maybe you pass that cost on the customer, maybe you bid it and that cuts in your margin. I don't know. So it all goes into the plan.
Yeah, I mean, all of that is absolutely on point, and I'm glad that you kind of brought technology into that conversation, because technology does play a huge part in how we manage our time. And you mentioned the Fumigide in particular, which for sulfurofluoride fluoride or Profume is a huge tool that helps you manage your time, because you're inputting the data live. Again, you're monitoring data and everything live into the Fumigide, and it's telling you how your fumigation's going, and it's giving you options on what you want to do. Just like you said, either extend the exposure period to hit your target CT, or add gas in order to hit your target CT. But it gives you these options, so it helps you manage your time. Hey, if I extend this, another 4 hours, I'll hit my target CT, and that potential loss in 4 hours of production is less, quote, expensive to the facility than adding the gas, or vice versa. So having technological tools like the Fumigide can play a huge role in time management.
Right. Or there's the converse. Maybe it's the first time that you've done that job and your half lost time was much better than expected. Or maybe you were aided by a nice light rain shower overnight, that never seems to happen. It's always a storm that threatens your
Yeah.
schools, but a light shower, and it helps the building retain gas. And you actually hit your target concentration earlier. And now you have the decision of, well, if I'm going to be retaining more gas in the building, do I actually want to open it early and begin aeration earlier, because I've got more gas remaining at termination and I need to get it all out of the building again to hand them the keys back on time. So
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point, because I've been on several Profume jobs where that indeed has happened, where the gas held better than you expected. And so in most of those cases, you can choose to begin your aeration early. But again, that falls right back into time management. So for example, if you have a fumigation team on call to begin the aeration, and the expectation is the aeration is going to start, say, Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m., but based on the data that you're putting into the Fumigide, you find out that you're actually going to be able to begin aeration Sunday at 7 a.m. you better give your guys a call and let them know that the time's changed. So that time management plays a huge part. You need to be able to call your team and say, hey, I know I said 2 p.m., but it's going to be 7 a.m. now when I need you guys to show up. If they don't show up till 2 p.m., now you're losing that potential aeration time, and you're losing potentially being able to hand the keys back over to the facility manager sooner. So all of that stuff plays a part. So if you're choosing to begin your aeration early because you've hit your target CT, yeah, you got to let your people know so they can get back and begin the aeration on that time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know as fumigation managers, it's important to be able to delegate, especially to, like your lead fumigators on your team, especially on these large jobs where you have several people on. You may end up splitting into several different crews, and each crew is going to have kind of like a lead fumigator that's also delegating tasks to their team. So how important is that delegation in staying on track? I mean, and as a fumigation manager, how do you delegate effectively in that high risk environment? I mean, what's important about the delegation?
One of my coworkers, who shall remain nameless, says there is a fine line between delegation and laziness, and I'll never let you know where I'm at.
I like that. That's great.
I like it too. So yeah, there's a management catchphrase for everyone listening out there. I've always been a fan of the mantra to always be training to replacement. That was a concept from my former employer. And in that, I mean, I want somebody ready to step in to handle important tasks in case I can't be where I need to be at the moment. Life happens. This is a hard lesson we learned during the COVID pandemic. One day we were fine, and the next day you're symptomatic and testing positive, and you're home for 2 weeks. So the business, of course, had to go on. And you need to have that competent co-leader waiting in the wings to make sure the jobs get done. Unfortunately, though, for some fumigators, it's a hang-up for them. Some fumigators, they want to be in on every bid process, and they want to be there leading every job. And it's hard for them to delegate that leadership role on the job site to other fumigators. As a lead fumigator, and I've said this during stewardship, I consider myself responsible for every soul on that job site, whether they work for me or they work for my client, or maybe they just live in the neighborhood. But I consider myself responsible for every soul on that site from the time that I stepped on the grounds. And trusting someone to inspect those important seals or to help complete a checklist of those often missed items, to assist with that final walkthrough, like in the case of Profume, where we don't have a warning agent. Those are things I preferred to do myself. And I was one of those guys that I wanted to walk the roof last all the time and check all the seals, and I wanted to walk the entire 5.5 million cubic feet, every floor of the plant, and check everywhere. And so it takes a lot to be able to trust someone in the fumigation environment to be able to delegate into those roles. And really it's making sure that they've had a very thorough training, and spending a lot of time with them, maybe actually just have them shadow you on some similar jobs, or on that particular job that you're going to hand them the reins to the next time that it's done. But whatever it is, it's a lot of trust before you get to that delegation point for a lead fumigator, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Yeah. And I think there's a trickle down method of delegation, I think, that correlates with the safety considerations for the responsibilities on a fumigation. And what I mean by that is, of course, you have your fumigation manager that is usually responsible for a lot of the administrative duties. They're responsible for the entirety of the job. And then maybe they have lead fumigators that are working with different crews. Like I said, with these large jobs, you're thinking of these several million cubic feet facilities where you may split your crew into 2 or 3 groups, where one crew is working on one side of the building, another crew may be working on the inside, sealing up, and the third crew may be working out, getting the fumigant in place and ready to go, whatever the case is. But in those situations, you as the fumigation manager, are maybe, overseeing everything and then delegating to your lead fumigators the critical responsibilities. And then the lead fumigators are then delegating some of those responsibilities out to the standard labor that's there. Sealing doors, sealing overhead doors, man doors, putting placards up, things like that. But then you go a step above that, and then you get into monitoring line placement, possibly introduction line placement, making sure that you know where all the exhaust fan on and off switches are, to assistant aeration, things like that. And then you go up to the fumigation manager level, where maybe the fumigation manager is responsible for the fumigation management plan. They're responsible to oversee all of the job in its entirety. So I think a lot of that delegation also depends on the matter of safety and the critical nature of the responsibilities, and you can kind of trickle that down depending on the experience level of the people that are on the site.
Yeah, I think so. And that you mentioned a good point there with that experience level. As we would set up our work crews or our teams for the job, it was a mix of experience levels or who was maybe someone's just more comfortable being up on the exhaust tower tied off, actually
Yeah,
working near an unguarded edge than someone else. So they've been in a harness before and they've done those vents, and they're going to do it faster than you sending an inexperienced person that has a fear of heights and really is not going to feel comfortable being up in that situation. We like to sit down because there was the day to day, those fumigation employees. Then, like you said, just the laborers that we'd mix in on the big jobs. And we would sometimes, even match those crews, like to match them up a little bit by personalities and stuff. You want them to get along.
sure.
You won't want them to be so buddy buddy that they're not productive during the job.
Yeah, yeah.
But you don't want them to not get along because yes, somebody's feelings might get hurt, or after a long day, and somebody wants to wander off then and join their buddies on another team. So we really like to sort of match them up by personalities and experience levels as well to make sure they were most productive.
Those are all good points. So, Scott, I only have one more question for you, and I always ask a version of this question based on whatever topic we're discussing. But I wanted to ask for new leaders in fumigation, what advice would you give them to help them to stay organized, time efficient, and productive?
I think you and I have already mentioned this a couple of different times today, and I'm sure it's been mentioned before on the podcast too, but I'm a big fan of checklists. I like checklists for preparation. I like checklists for execution. Equipment checklists to make sure everything goes in your box truck or the trailer so that everything's packed for the job. I was on a job site recently and they went to put the pop-up canopy up to cover the monitoring station. And lo and behold, the wrong canopy cover was there. So we didn't have shade over the equipment for a little bit. Fortunately, we were 10 minutes away from a big box store and went over there and bought another one and, ran back with it and set something else up. But they had a canopy. It was just the wrong one because the right one had, the wind had ripped it on the last job and they had forgot about it, forgot to replace it. So I love checklist. I love that checklist you alluded to. Where's all the air handling equipment controls located at? And has that list been updated
Yeah.
recently? If they redid a line, did they move the locations of something? I was on a job last year and was working with a company, and it was a job that I had done before in my past role. And I'm walking through this building and it's like I used to remember some controls being in here, and so much had changed in that facility walking through it 5 years later. It was amazing. So keeping things up to date like that, you don't want to get to a remote job site and have a missing piece of or broken piece of equipment. So making sure that everything's packed that needs to be there. I was even on a residential fumigation once, and we were tracking pounds on the side of the Viking cylinder, and I trusted that the amount written on the side of the cylinder was accurate. And rather than weighing the cylinder. And you know what happened.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, so it was a 4 hour road trip to receive another cylinder to top off the house. So, to get the fumigation back on schedule, game plan the entire process. Your FMP, going back to that client delegation. So, delegate responsibilities to the client themselves and that timeline, when you expect those air handlers on the roof to be turned off, when you expect, here's the absolute time when generally when they're shut down, of course, they'll bring in other contractors, maybe to electricians or HVAC folks or something. And well, here's the time when I need them gone out of here. And make sure that there's a sign in sheet that all of your people, they showed up for the job. Maybe somebody didn't show up on Saturday morning. Their kid got sick or whatever reason might be, they didn't show up. And how many of the plant's employees are inside, the sanitation people that are blowing down the overhead surfaces since they're shut down, and those maintenance people that are opening up dust collectors and maybe switchgear panels and the like. Are they all accounted for and did they all sign out? So just keeping track of everything. We even got to the point where we would write numbers on the razor knives that we would hand to each employee to cut their poly. So we wanted to make sure they came back with their knife, and how we
Yeah.
made sure they came back with their knife was, where's your knife, when they would go sign out at the end of the day. And we would always tell them in the morning, no knife, no timesheet. So
Oh, yeah.
so, that a lot of detail, whether it's, a lot of checklists. I was a giant fan of all of these checklists. And then again, updating them. And as you mentioned earlier, lots of notes. Weather is something that, someone looks at their last job and goes, man, wow, why were my readings so far off? And they forget about the really bad weather that they had. Maybe it was colder than they expected, or they had a lot more wind, and they forget these things. So lots of notes, lots of details that you can use in the future when you go to redo that job again.
Yep. I mean, you're spot on with all of that. Absolutely correct on all of that. I couldn't agree with you more. I also like to think that it's a good idea to kind of plan your fumigation from the aeration backwards. So you kind of have an idea on how you want to initiate aeration, how you want to actually apply the fumigant. But in my opinion, you want to start at the aeration portion. When you're planning, you want to start at the aeration portion and kind of work your way backward. And that will actually help you kind of figure some of that out. And then also, you have to plan for things to go wrong with the hopes that they don't. Because if you think that everything's going to go right and it doesn't, if that weather does blow in and you do end up losing gas and you have to extend your time, you have to have a plan in place to be able to handle that. I mean, the worst feeling in the world is having to call a customer Monday morning, and they may even have their labor force sitting in a parking lot waiting for the structure to clear. There's no worse feeling in the world than having to call a customer and saying, hey, I know we told you we were going to give your facility back to you at, say, 8 a.m. Monday morning. We're not going to be able to get it back to you until noon. And things like that happen. Sometimes they're out of your control, whatever the case is, but it's a terrible feeling to have to do that. So you want to be thinking about those things when you're planning your fumigation in the hopes that they don't happen. But if you plan for them, maybe you can extend the time out. Maybe you can start things earlier. Maybe you can get your customer to turn those exhaust fans off earlier, or help them with their time management, or just let them know, hey, if you don't give me the facility at the time that we agreed upon, there's a high chance that we may not be able to give the facility back to you at the time that you wanted. Or if you know that the customer usually runs late and they can't help it, maybe plan to add more gas for a shorter exposure period in the case of like Profume or something, where you have a little bit of that allowance so you can begin your aeration earlier, knowing that the more gas that's in, it's going to take a little bit longer to aerate. But those are the kinds of things that you need to plan for. Those are things that go wrong sometimes, but you can kind of think about those things. What if this happens? What if that happens? What's my plan going to be if those do occur? And you can kind of plan for them. You can't catch everything that may go wrong, but if you plan for it, you can catch some of it. And a lot of times still be able to stay on time.
Exactly. And, back at time and, labor being a time component as well. Never short yourself on the labor because someone's going to get sick or, some other form of life's going to happen and you may end up a guy short. I ended up on a leading a fumigation one weekend and I was completely out in my back, but still showed up and literally had just the owner's son of the company actually, and he's still in the pest management industry. And so he actually, he's like, "What are you doing today?" I'm like, "You are my arms and legs. Like, I am going to walk around, and you get to do all the physical stuff while I just mope around here and try and get the job done." And we've all been there. So,
oh yeah.
Yeah, I had one fumigation where, the screw fell out of my glasses and I lost a lens and I was all day without my glasses and didn't pack a spare pair. So Murphy always shows up.
Oh yeah. I like that. Murphy always shows up and you're absolutely right. So, Well, hey, Scott, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. You brought some really, really valuable insight to this particular topic, and I can't thank you enough for that.
I appreciate it, Ben. So again, time management's important, and we all think about the technical details, but time is one of those critical factors in the fumigation process.
And time is one thing that you can never get back.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Scott.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Scott for joining us and sharing such practical advice. In fumigation, time is literally money. Every minute counts, and strong time management can make the difference between a job that runs smoothly and one that maybe goes off the rails. Next time on Dagish America Presents, we'll be talking about how to build high-performing teams in a high-risk environment. We'll cover hiring, motivating, and retaining top talent who not only do the job well, but do it safely and consistently. And as always, if you have questions, comments, or a topic you'd like to hear us cover, please email us at podcast@dagishamerica.com, or you can also visit us on our social media sites. Until next time, I'm Ben Harrell. Be safe, stay sharp, and we'll see you soon.